I just got out of my first few drafts of the year, and I'll tell you, it was hard. I was rusty, and I need to do more research, and I'm going to do that in this video by giving you rankings. All right, I'm talking through every single player, the positives, the negatives, specifically at the wide receiver position. And with Jamar Chase, it's very difficult to find many negatives. Over the past 4 years of his NFL career, every single season, he has finished as a top 10 receiver. He almost won me the Flock League this past year. Thank you for doing everything you could, my friend. I mean, there were some weeks I had no shot, and he goes out and he drops 41 points. He drops 55 points. He drops 45 points. The ceiling was higher than anybody else in fantasy football from a week-to-week perspective, and the floor was incredibly high as well. Going into this next season, nothing's really changing. They're running the same crew back. You'll still have Higgins. You'll still have Burrow. And Chase did have about 700 routes run last year, which has to be at the top of the NFL. I'm going over and looking at our next receiver. I'm going out on a limb here. Of course, if you go into Underdog Draft right now, you will see Justin Jefferson's the wide receiver too, and I completely understand why. I'm putting CeeDee Lamb. All right, now the reason being is while yes, Chase just had a monstrous season with 403 fantasy points. You go back 2 years ago when Dak Prescott stayed healthy all year, CeeDee Lamb scored 403 fantasy points. It was the exact same mark. CeeDee Lamb had 2.88 yards per route run. CeeDee Lamb had 181 targets. Now, of course, he did regress this past season where you had the Dak Prescott injury, and it wasn't like the Dak Prescott injury was the only reason. CeeDee Lamb was already showing signs of slowing down at the beginning of the year. I mean, you had week 3 with only 8.5 points. You had week 5 with only 11.5 points. Jamar was going to be the wide receiver one no matter what. But if we're looking at the setup going into this next season, the Dallas Cowboys don't really bring anybody in to be the wide receiver 2 here in Dallas. Instead, it's going to be the CeeDee Lamb show where he could reasonably get back to that 30% team target share that he had 2 years ago. And we know that we have seen Dak Prescott in the past be a high volume passer and top 5 in the NFL in both passing touchdowns and passing yards. If we look at the historical data at wide receivers that posted similar age 25 seasons to CeeDee Lamb, you had guys like Antonio Brown, Larry Fitzgerald, AJ Green, Keenan Allen, Brandon Marshall, Alshon Jeffrey, Deontay Johnson, and then this past year, Justin Jefferson, T. Higgins, and CeeDee Lamb. But keep in mind, these are numbers with an injured Dak Prescott. With Dak Prescott fully healthy this next season, should be even better. If you wanted to take Jefferson, I'm not going to fault you for it at all. Jefferson clearly crushed Lamb. You go back to this past season, he was the wide receiver 2. If you look at every year of Justin Jefferson's NFL career, outside of 2023 when he gets injured, he has been a top 5 wide receiver in total fantasy points scored. You look at every single season for Justin Jefferson, he has been at least 2.5 yards per route run. He has been incredible. This past season, he was able to do it with Sam Darnold. Now you're going to have McCarthy. McCarthy could represent a quarterback upgrade over Darnold. He could be worse than Darnold. We frankly don't know. The reason I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to Lamb here is one, Lamb has posted a season that Justin Jefferson's never come close to with the 403 fantasy points. And the second thing is, if we are looking at the situation that Jefferson has, he does have to compete for targets with both Jordan Addison as well as TJ Hawkinson. So they're in the same tier for me. You rank them however you want. I'm going to give the slight edge to CeeDee Lamb. And right now in Underdog Drafts, Lamb has an ADP of pick 6. And he is going to be my most drafted round 1 player if this ADP remains the same, because I think I could take him as early as the 103. But of course, if you wanted to draft with us and you wanted to crush me in my own drafts over there on Underdog Fantasy, you can find that link in the description as well as the comment section. If you use promo code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog to get into drafts today, you will actually be getting a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you'll be getting my 2025 fantasy football draft guide cheat sheet. I know pretty much everybody watching these videos is already drafting with me every night in the live streams, which I really do appreciate. And of course, if you're not already, they are best ball drafts, so it's not going to replace your main fantasy football league. It will just be some extra fun on the side because there's no time commitment during the season. But let's move over to our next tier. And we're going to lead off with Puka Nacua. Now, I understand that, yes, Puka this past season, he misses time. You only see him actually play 11 games. He's the wide receiver 26 in total fantasy points. And I've seen that people think it's crazy with how high I have him ranked in Dynasty, blah, 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 blah. Keep in mind, I whiffed on Puka so hard his rookie season when he turned out to be a top 5 wide receiver, one of the most embarrassing things to ever happen in fantasy football. But I'm willing to bend the knee, and I'm willing to say he had 4 yards per route run last year. Puka Nacua, 4.07 yards per route run. When Puka was healthy, he was arguably the most efficient wide receiver in the NFL. He was at 2.71 yards per route run as a rookie. The other wide receivers at the top of this list, Jefferson was at 2.65 yards per route run as a rookie. CeeDee Lamb was at 2.18. Jamar Chase was at 2.71. So Puka Nacua would be at the very top of this list in comparison to the other elite level options. I think you're going into this next year. Yes, you have no Kupp. You have Davante Adams in. We assume that Adams is going to be better than what Kupp was, but you still have some of the top quarterback play in the NFL when it comes to passing volume. You're going into year 3. Presumably you're fully healthy. Zero hesitation at all with Puka. Now, in those underdog drafts that we did, I actually found myself drafting a lot of Amon-Ra St. Brown. And if you're looking at most drafts, you will see in most drafts, Malik Nabers go higher, Brian Thomas go higher, and Nico Collins go higher. I'm not going to argue with anybody if they want to put those wide receivers ahead of St. Brown. The reason I'm preferring St. Brown, the reason I'm taking a lot of them, 4 seasons, there's been 2 games missed. 17, 16, 16, 17 games played. The dude plays football. He plays through anything. And at the same time, you have a floor of about 20 fantasy points in a full PPR format. Now, of course, if you're drafting with us on Underdog at the moment, half PPR, maybe a little bit less exciting there. But over the past 3 years, you're looking at a receiver that finishes as wide receiver 6, wide receiver 3, wide receiver 3. You have a wide receiver that has 3 straight finishes with over 100 receptions, a wide receiver that's averaging over 2.5 yards per route run over the past 3 seasons. Going back to 2023, Amon-Ra St. Brown had 30% of his team's target share in Detroit. Now, of course, you have Ben Johnson leaving Detroit. And if you think Ben Johnson is a wizard, if you think that this is really going to negatively impact the overall offense, by all means, take Malik Nabers higher. I'm not going to argue with anybody who wants to put Malik Nabers as high as the wide receiver 4. That's why we're doing these as tiers. Because you go over and you look at Malik Nabers, he played 15 games in his rookie season and had 170 targets. Yes, through 15 games, he had more targets in his rookie year than Amon-Ra St. Brown's ever had in a season. You have to give this man a ridiculous amount of credit. And despite this being one of the worst offenses in the NFL, he actually runs 2.2 yards per route run. He goes for over 1,200 receiving yards in only 15 games played. And he is the first wide receiver that we have pretty much seen over the past decade finish as a mid to high end wide receiver 1 in a bottom 5 offense in the NFL. It just frankly doesn't happen. Plus, you look at the fact that the Giants really don't bring in serious target competition for Nabers this offseason. So we can sit here and we can assume Nabers yet again is guaranteed to have 30% of his team's targets at the very minimum. This past year, he's at 35%. And the quarterback play could be better with the combination of Russell Wilson as well as Jackson Dart. Now, for me, I think that the floor we have with St. Brown, as well as the offense being significantly better, is going to lead me to draft them just slightly ahead of Nabers. But again, any smart person that you're ever going to watch is going to tell you to draft Nabers. I'm just simply not smart. Now, let's go over and let's look at Nico Collins. Nico Collins gives you some absolutely crazy weeks. You have a week with 27 fantasy points, a week with 13 fantasy points, and then obviously he gets injured in week 5, and then we don't see him again until week 10. But if you're looking at the efficiency over the past 2 years, Nico Collins has averaged over 3 yards per route run. He's looked great. I am a little bit biased. We had a team get to the Best Ball Mania finals. I'm sitting here, I'm thinking all Christmas week, I'm telling all my family on Christmas, hey, I have a team in the Best Ball Mania finals. I'm having to explain to all of them what Underdog Fantasy is. I'm saying, hey, if Nico Collins, Lamar, and Zay Flowers go crazy in this game, I'm going to be winning $1 million. This is insane. And then Nico Collins craps the bed. Nico Collins in week 17 gives me 8.5 fantasy points, and I walk away with my tail between my legs, and I don't win anything. So very frustrating, but if we are going to give the man the benefit of the doubt, for a 25-year-old wide receiver to put up these numbers, he historically comps to Davante Adams, Demaryius Thomas, Mike Evans, A.J. Brown. If you're looking at the quarterback play, I actually think that C.J. Stroud could be a little bit better this next season. Now, of course, they do bring in target competition for Nico in the form of 2 Iowa State wide receivers. One gets a decent amount of draft capital, but of course, you'll have no Tank Dell. But anyway, I think you can rank this tier of guys in whatever order that you want. Going over and looking at A.J. Brown, big storyline that you're going to have here. One, obviously, A.J. Brown gets a little bit banged up this past season, falls down to wide receiver 20, where he was the wide receiver 5 the year before that, the wide receiver 5 the year before that. But you actually had the efficiency move up dramatically, and A.J. Brown commanded a higher percentage of his team's offense. A.J. Brown was at 34.5% of the Philadelphia Eagles targets from a per game perspective, 3.16 yards per route run. Now, the routes fell dramatically, where he only ran 341 routes this past year. And that's going to be a big issue that you have maybe with the Eagles offense, as opposed to some of these offenses above, is that the Eagles are such a good football team that the passing volume is naturally just going to be a little bit lower, considering they can play defense and they can run the ball. But you do have the big playability with Brown. He won't have as much target volume as the other guys. Now, here at 7, we are going to have Brian Thomas. And with Thomas, I completely understand people wanted to go ahead and take him ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown as well. For me, I just personally can't. But if you're looking at his rookie season, to give the man his flowers, 2.5 yards per route run, 25% team target share, finishes the wide receiver 4, plays all 17 games. And this is with the context of Trevor Lawrence getting injured. I mean, we want to sit here and we want to make all these excuses for CeeDee Lamb, but Brian Thomas was able to do it when his quarterback went down. And if we look at historical comps for seasons like Brian Thomas's at 23 years old, you have Hall of Fame level receivers here. You have DeAndre Hopkins. You have Julio Jones. You have other great names like CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, T. Higgins, a wide receiver prospect I love back in the day, and Sammy Watkins. Obviously, that didn't turn out too strong. But nonetheless, you have elite alphas, which it appears that Brian Thomas is turning into. My hesitation to put him ahead of some of these other names like Nabers, St. Brown, Puka Nacua is Travis Hunter coming in, I believe, is a true elite level prospect. And it does seem that Hunter is going to play a ton on the offensive side of the ball at this point. And I'm not as in love with the Jags offense as what I'm going to be with the Rams offense, is what I'm going to be with the Lions offense at this point. So I think he's in a slightly worse offense. I think he has a lot of target competition. Now, going over to our next guy, we are going to be looking at Drake London. It's kind of funny that London has his best week in week 18 against the Carolina Panthers. We're all done playing. I know some people want us to make videos in week 18. I'm sorry. I'm not talking about fantasy football in week 18. Your championship should be in week 17. But in week 18, 5 yards per route run, the man drops a 40 bomb. Insane. We can go back to week 5. He also has that blow up performance when Kirk Cousins, I believe, had 500 passing yards. London drops 33 points. But if you remove those 2 weeks, you didn't have another game with over 20 fantasy points. You did see the efficiency rise in the form of his yards per route run, his target share as well. He actually had 29% of the targets in Atlanta this past year. He saw 100 receptions, had 158 targets, and had over 1,200 receiving yards as well. Plus, he played 91% of the snaps, which was higher than what he did in year 1 and year 2. I'm going into this next year. It all comes down to the efficiency that you're going to get from Michael Penix. I just simply have no idea, but I do know that London is going to be one of the very few wide receivers you can pencil in close to a 30% team target share, unless you think Kyle Pitts going to take some massive leap forward. Going over and looking at Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey had a great rookie season, right? But when I look at the historical comps, instead of comparing Ladd to historical rookies, I do want to try to be objective about this and compare Ladd McConkey to other historical 23-year-olds, right? Because there are some wide receivers coming into the NFL draft this year that they're only 20. And of course, if they had the same rookie season that Ladd McConkey did, I would lose my mind, right? When Malik Nabers goes nuclear, I'm like, look at how young this guy is. Ladd was 23 years old, so it makes sense that he'd be a little bit more pro ready, especially coming from a school like Georgia. Maybe doesn't necessarily have the same level ceiling that we're going to get with those other year 2 receivers, such as Malik Nabers and Brian Thomas, but still an absolute great season, over 2.5 yards per route run, a target share at about 25%, finishes as the wide receiver 13. But even comparing him to 23-year-old receivers, we still have great options. Historical comps include 23-year-olds like Tyreek Hill, AJ Green, DJ Moore. Going into this next season, you're in a situation where you do have the round 2 Trey Harris coming in. You have the big Q himself, maybe stealing a few touchdowns, but the main issue is going to be just not a lot of passing volume. You only had 448 routes for Ladd this past season because you don't have a ton of Justin Herbert dropbacks. Now, looking at the Dolphins, guys, it's going to be tough. We'll talk about Jaylen Waddle a little later on, but Tyreek specifically here, when Tua played, he wasn't that bad. Now, of course, he was unstartable when you had no Tua. I mean, Tua goes down in the Buffalo game And then Tyreek Hill gives you 6.5, 7, 8.5, 13, 2.5, 13, 12 fantasy points. Tyreek doesn't show any signs of life until you get to about week 11. Tyreek was one of the worst picks in fantasy this past year. The efficiency fell off a cliff. He went from 3.87 yards per route in 2023 to 1.9 yards per route in 2024. And by the way, all these screenshots are from flockfantasy.com. You can go ahead and pull up the site and look at this stuff whenever you want. Just click on the players in the rankings page. He finished as the wide receiver 18, did play a ton of snaps, but again, if we look at the splits with and without Tua for Tyreek, since he's joined the Miami Dolphins, he's played 40 games with Tua, and those games, he averages 20.5 points. He's played 10 games without Tua, and in those games, he averages 11.5 points. So Tyreek looks like he could very easily be a wide receiver 1 if Tua is healthy. If Tua is not, it's going to be the worst thing in the world. But if you're like in an underdog draft where it's a $25 buy-in, $2 million for first place, and you are shooting for the ceiling, Tyreek still does have those 40-point bomb weeks in his range of outcomes. And going over and looking at T. Higgins, we know that people won an insane amount of money on Underdog last year, specifically because T. Higgins gives you the 40-point bomb in week 17 exactly when you need it. I mean, if you're looking at the season on the whole, this is someone I drafted a ton in round 4 this past season. Sadly, my Best Ball Mania team I advanced did not have T. Higgins in week 17. It is what it is. But the efficiency wasn't like anything special. It wasn't anything too different than what we've seen in the past. I mean, he was at 2.07 yards per route. This is about his career average. It's right in line. I guess you could say his target share went significantly up. It went up to about 25%. But if we're looking at Higgins on the whole, a lot of it was just those spike weeks that you had. In week 11, he drops 30 points. In week 5, he drops 30 points. And in week 17, he drops 40 points. The efficiency wasn't anything great. I know he cost a lot more now than he did last year, which honestly, I don't necessarily understand why. If he was a 4th round pick last season, he should be up there at the end of the 2nd this year in these underdog drafts. If you're looking at the tendency of missing games, it's still there. He still missed time this past year. And he's only had 1 season finishing inside the top 12. Actually, he's had 0 seasons finishing inside the top 12 for the wide receiver position. So I will probably actually consider moving JSN up the ranks. So my thing with JSN is counting stats look great, right? He had 100 receptions. Phenomenal. But the efficiency is still not solid. I mean, he actually was sitting at 1.3 yards per route as a rookie. That moved up to 1.8 yards per route as a second-year player. So when we're looking at the counting stats and he had 100 receptions, really cool in a full PPR format, really cool that you play all 17 games. But I'm maybe a little bit concerned that if you're looking at the per game numbers that are not super special, the historical comps for 22-year-old seasons that look similar to this, Percy Arvin, Brandon Cooks, T. Higgins, Garrett Wilson, Amari, Aiyuk, Eddie Royal, Michael Clayton, Bryant Thomas had similar age 22 seasons. So he is still very young. He can continue to get better. And going over and looking at Garrett Wilson, Wilson's a monster. He played 97% of the snaps for the Jets this past year. He finishes as the wide receiver 10. He has 154 targets. Now, again, similar to JSN, the efficiency is not exactly there. 1.7 yards per route, very bad. The target share fell from 30% down to 26% from year 2 to year 3. A lot of this obviously had to do with Davante Adams coming in. I think we get closer to that 30% target share this year with no Davante Adams, but the passing volume could be very low in this offense with Fields as opposed to Rodgers. Now, moving down to our next tier, we're going to be looking at Marvin Harrison, who had a very poor rookie season. If you were looking at what the expectations were, people were taking him at the end of round 1 of underdog drafts. Thank God we dodged that bullet for most of the offseason. But my first underdog draft this year on the live stream, I took Marvin Harrison at the 3-4 turn. And honestly, at that price point, I think I'm in, because while his rookie season wasn't great, it was still okay. I mean, the man was sitting here and he had more yards per route than what you were looking at with Jackson Smith and Jigba this past season, or about the same, definitely more than the rookie year. He had a 22% team target share. The difficulty is the touchdowns weren't, but we understand that that is going to be something that kind of goes back and forth. If we're looking at 22-year-old players that had similar seasons to what Marvin Harrison Jr. did this past year, you have Calvin Johnson. Yes, Detroit Lions, Calvin Johnson. Drake London, Deshaun Jackson, Stephon Diggs, Andre Johnson, Dez Bryant, Dante Moncrief, Torrey Smith, Robert Woods. Do I think he's Calvin Johnson? Probably not. Do I think he's Deshaun Jackson, Andre Johnson? Probably not. But could he be Drake London? Could he be a low-end wide receiver 1 in fantasy? I think that's very much in the range of outcomes, especially when they don't really bring in too much more target competition in Arizona. Now, going over and looking at Davante Adams, I know people are very excited to draft Adams this year. You look at where he's going in underdog drafts. I mean, I think if you're following these rankings, you may not end up with much of him. But my thing is, he's going to be 33. He's drafted way back in 2014. So for me, I'm going to need the age discount if I'm getting him. Now, I completely understand he's going and he's going to have some pretty damn good quarterback play with Matthew Stafford. But you definitely have seen the efficiency drop over the past 2 years, where historically we had seen Adams, even with poor quarterback play, like in 2022, sitting at about 2.6 yards per route. In 2021, his last year in Green Bay, sitting at about 3.2 yards per route. Over the past 2 seasons, that's fallen down to about 2 flat. And when you're a 33-year-old receiver, I begin to get a little bit concerned just when we see any efficiency slide whatsoever. If we do look at age 32 seasons that were similar to Davante Adams this past year, however, you had Ed McCaffrey, Marvin Harrison Sr., Julian Edelman, Larry Fitzgerald, Jimmy Smith, Reggie Wayne, Isaac Bruce, Randy Moss, and even some of these players like Randy Moss, like Isaac Bruce, did fall off when they hit 33 years old. Now, going over and looking at Terry McLaurin, Terry has his best year of his NFL career by far at 29 years old this past season, where he finishes the wide receiver 7. It's another example of a guy that's just going to rack up a ton of counting stats, given the fact that he plays 17 games every week, which of course we don't want to count that against him. But if you're looking at the efficiency, 2.12 yards per route, not super impressive. The target share is right in line with what it's been historically as well at about 23%. The big difference is the touchdowns were finally there. And of course, we're going to expect that when you have Jaden Daniels under center, naturally the efficiency is going to be much higher in Washington. Now, going over and looking at Devonta Smith, Mike Evans, I think you make a strong argument to push Mike Evans ahead of him, of course. With Smith, younger wide receiver, going to be 27 in his prime, in a good offense. Issue is with Philadelphia, of course, they're not going to be throwing the ball too often, and Smith is going to be the wide receiver 2. Heading over and looking at Mike Evans, what's funny is for the past 4 years, he has become a more efficient receiver every season. This dude is 32 years old at this point. He's going into his 12th NFL season, I believe, maybe 11th NFL season. But you're looking at his yards per route going from 1.76 to 1.94 to 2.38 to 2.44. 24% team target share this past year. Yet again, gets to 1,000 receiving yards. He does only play 71% of the snaps. So you do see that falling over the past 3 years. So what it appears, if you're looking at his snaps, if you're looking at his routes versus his yards, his volume is going down with his playing time as he ages, but the production is remaining consistent. So the efficiency is going up, which is a very interesting thing to note. Obviously, if he comes anything close to repeating what he's been through his entire NFL career, he is way undervalued in these rankings. The question is, do they use Igbokwe? If they do, how much is he getting used this year? And is that taking anything away from Evans, where they have shown the slide with his routes, with his snaps, and with his playing time in general as he's aged? Now, going over and looking at Xavier Worthy, of course, hook 'em horns. I want to root for my guy. And if we're looking at Worthy, his age 21 season comps to some great receivers through history. I mean, the comps are like Josh Gordon, JSN, Percy Harvin, DeAndre Hopkins, Jordan Addison, Drake London, Jerry Jeudy. You also have some pretty big busts on this list like Elijah Moore. Then you have Antonio Bryant, but then Xavier Worthy. If we're looking at Worthy himself, the main thing hinges in Kansas City, I guess, 2 things. One, do we ever see Mahomes get back to 2018, 2019, 2020, 2020? Do we get Mahomes where he's top 5 in the NFL in pass attempts? Because if that happens, every single one of these Chiefs wide receivers will be massive values. Or are we going to get the Mahomes of 2024 and 2023, where this is a Chiefs offense where the passing volume isn't really there because they can just run the ball and play defense? So that's one thing. Second thing is, what's the true situation at the moment with Rice's suspension and Rice's injury? If Rice is not going to serve any suspension time, if Rice is going to be 100% good to go for week 1 when it comes to his health, then Rashee Rice is the massive value, and Rice is the guy that you want to be drafting. Because we go ahead and we look at what Rice has been able to accomplish through the first 2 years of his NFL career. Of course, in year 2, super small sample, he really only plays 3 weeks, but the man's the wide receiver 14, 16, and then the wide receiver 3 in those 3 weeks. And during that, he has a target share over 30%. And on top of that, he actually has 3.38 yards per route. Absurd numbers that we are getting from Rice. It is just extremely difficult to rank these Chiefs receivers at this point when we don't have the clarity on the Rice situation with how much he will be missing this next year, if he'll be missing at all. Now, going over to the next 2 receivers, we're going to have Tet McMillan and we are going to have Travis Hunter. At the moment, Travis Hunter has an ADP of wide receiver 33 in Underdog drafts. In a format which it is a $25 buy-in for $2 million for first, or a puppy format where it's a $5 buy-in, $100,000 for first place, and we are chasing the highest in range of outcomes, Travis Hunter could be rookie season Odell Beckham Jr. If you're looking at Travis Hunter, the prospect profile, he is up there with the likes of Odell, despite him playing 86% of the defensive snaps in college. If he ends up playing 40, even 30, or even 20% of the defensive snaps in the NFL for the Jags, he's going to be overranked here. I wouldn't expect him to be a hyper productive wide receiver in that instance. But as of now, the Jags coaching staff is saying he's going to be a wide receiver first, and they're going to slowly teach him the defensive side of the playbook. And with Tet McMillan, the crazy thing is the dude was averaging like 110 receiving yards per game in college. And you look at the next best receiver in his offense, the next best receiver was sitting at like 300 receiving yards for the season. Like McMillan, unbelievably dominant, top 10 NFL draft pick, and goes to an offense where he can also be an alpha and immediately command 25% of his team's target share. So McMillan, Hunter, I think they're both elite wide receiver prospects, and I'd draft them aggressively. Going over and looking at Courtland Sutton, y'all know we have had our fair share of Courtland Sutton hate over the years. And if we are looking at Sutton, this past season, by far and away the best year of his NFL career, gets up to 240 fantasy points. He actually puts up 1.92 for his yards per route run and gives you a 25% team target share. If you're looking at the historical comps for 29-year-old wide receivers that had similar seasons, you had AJ Green, Mike Evans, Donald Driver, Michael Crabtree, Demaryius Thomas, Marquise Colston, Anquan Bolden, Santana Moss, Kevin Curtis. Courtland Sutton looks a hell of a lot better. You have no additional target competition coming into this next season. It really is just going to come down to what you're getting with a year 2 leap from Bo Nix. I'm looking at Jameson Williams. Super interesting career so far, of course. You have the injury, then you have the suspension, you have another suspension. You're looking at a receiver that has gotten much better as his NFL career has gone on, though. He's gone from 1.2 yards per route as a rookie, then up to 1.5 as a second-year player, now up to 2.2 in his 3rd season. Through only 15 games, he does see over 1,000 receiving yards, and he finally gets 280 snaps. Of course, he's not going to be a high volume receiver. He's not going to be seeing a ton of targets ever. Like, he only had 91 targets this past year, target share of about 19%. But he's just going to be giving you a lot with those wide receivers. Like, one of his historical comps at 23 years old is actually like T.Y. Hilton, which I think does make a decent amount of sense here. Now, moving over to Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers in his 2nd season got better from an efficiency standpoint. The issue is they just played him less. Like, his yards per route rose from 1.67 up to 2.3, but his snap percentage fell from 86% down to 76%. He ran 513 routes as a rookie and only 450 routes as a second-year player, despite playing an extra game. So it's weird that the volume is going down, but the efficiency is going up for Flowers. Usually it's the opposite with these players going from year 1 to year 2 or year 2 to year 3 as they go on. Flowers was a little bit of an older rookie as well, so Flowers is going to be 25 years old. And the main question that you have to have is just in this rush first offense, are all the receivers going to be capped out with their upside? Now, going over and looking at DJ Moore, to have DJ Moore ranked at wide receiver 28 feels way too low. If you're just looking at the name, because I mean, if you go through his NFL career, DJ Moore has never finished lower than the wide receiver 21. This is another guy that just plays every single week, right? Now, I will say the efficiency has never been as bad as what it was this past year. He fell down to 1.5 yards per route. He ran a ton of routes, though. He ran 636 of them. And if you're going over and looking at what we have with the NFL draft, this is the main concern, where they bring in a tight end inside the top 10 picks. They draft Luther Burden as well. And you already had Rome Odunze going into year 2. This is a coaching staff that wasn't there when they signed DJ Moore. So with all the moving pieces, I'm afraid that the volume may go down a bit for him. And when we had already seen the efficiency drop dramatically from 2023 to 2024, it is going to be a concern, and I will rank him lower than where we've ever seen him finish. I'm going over to DK Metcalf. I saw a report on Twitter. Let me just go ahead and try to pull this up. That Aaron Rodgers is going to retire. If Rodgers truly does retire, I will tell you that I am moving DK Metcalf down these rankings. What you need is some positive news with a quarterback going to Pittsburgh. Whether that's Rodgers, whether that's Carr, you need somebody. If it doesn't happen, what's the upside? You have to actually compete with targets with guys. George Pickens is there. I'm not saying Pickens is great, but it's not like there's nobody on this roster. And it's going to be a rush first team with Caleb Johnson too. Going over and looking at Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin, to start off the season, was on an absolute tear. I mean, 22, 24, 17, 13, 11.5, 35.5, then 13.5 points the week he gets injured. Chris Godwin, I believe, was the wide receiver 2 in fantasy points going into week 7 when he played the Baltimore Ravens. He was putting up some of the best efficiency numbers we've ever seen from Godwin, up at 2.35 yards per route. He was playing 88% of the snaps, which is actually more snaps than we have seen since 2020. So again, it looked like Godwin was getting more and more usage, while Mike Evans was actually the guy scaling back in this offense, which makes sense. Mike Evans is 32, but you have Godwin coming off a significant injury. Not only do you have Godwin coming off a significant injury, but at the same time, you have them selecting a wide receiver in round 1 of the NFL draft with Igbukah, which I do think you need to be concerned about. Now, looking at Brandon Aiyuk, he is way undervalued in underdog drafts at the moment. And I'm very rarely going to come out here and tell you that, oh, everybody's wrong, because I know I'm an idiot, right? I get things wrong all the time. So who am I to say that somebody else is wrong? But for Aiyuk to be going after Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, and for Aiyuk to be going in like the wide receiver 40-ish range, I already drafted Aiyuk in 2 of the 3 drafts that we did on the live stream last night. And if you are looking at Brandon Aiyuk with this screenshot from flockfantasy.com, you will see in 2023 and 2022, wide receiver 13, wide receiver 13. If you were looking at the efficiency in 2023, 3.2 yards per route with a 25% team target share. While yes, you have Ricky Pearsall going into year 2. And y'all know I drafted a ton of Ricky Pearsall in underdog drafts last year before he got shot. Realistically, Pearsall, yes, blew up at the very end of the season for a singular week. We don't have the same sample size that we do with a player like Brandon Aiyuk. Brandon Aiyuk also has the contract to go along with this. Gets injured early enough in the season where I don't necessarily know if health is going to be too much of a concern going into this next year. Of course, look at the screenshot, flockfantasy.com. You will see he was a straight up bum for the first 7 weeks. I get it. I mean, he had 1 week through the first 7 weeks of this season where he was a wide receiver 3 or better. Unusable. Horrendous. He had the holdout situation. But I'm willing to take a step back. I'm willing to look at the larger sample and say, you have Deebo Samuel gone. Maybe Pearsall assumes the Deebo role. And I think Aiyuk over the larger sample has proven to be better than what you have with Jennings, who we'll talk about in a minute. I'm going over and looking at Jaylen Waddle. I get it. Waddle's been horrible. All right. Waddle was the wide receiver 45 this year. The wide receiver 30 before that. I mean, his second season, he was the wide receiver 7, and the man had almost 1,400 receiving yards. Incredible. But he's been horrible over the past 2 years. Now, again, very similar to what we looked at with Tyreek Hill. I want to be fair to Jaylen Waddle. I want to look at every game in Waddle's career that he's played with Tua and without Tua. Jaylen Waddle, 9.4 points per game with no Tua in his offense. Waddle with Tua in his offense, 15 points per game. Waddle's played 13 games with no Tua, and in those 13 games has scored 0 touchdowns. So I think Waddle can still be a wide receiver 2 if we get a fully healthy season from Tua. If you don't, Waddle's probably absolute garbage. If Tua gets injured again, Waddle would presumably be like wide receiver 60 in my rankings. Going over and looking at Jordan Addison. Y'all know we drafted a ton of Addison as like a wide receiver 4 last year in underdog drafts. Loved it. Phenomenal price point when he was going as like the wide receiver 40. Difficulty is now with Addison going into year 3, while he is showing signs of improvement, 1.7 yards per route up from 1.5 his first year. You actually see the target share go from 18% up to 21%. You do have the suspension concerns, and you have the change with the quarterback, and you have TJ Hawkinson healthy for the entire year. So I'm a little bit concerned. Now, with all that being said, I think Addison was a great player in college, a great prospect coming in, a great rookie, a great year 2 guy, which is why we went all in on him last year. But I do think you have to get a little bit of a discount given the suspension. And then if we're comparing him to other 22-year-old wide receivers that had this similar season, you do have bust on this list, like Chase Claypool obviously got much worse. I'd say Darius Slayton never really made a big impact, but you also have really strong players like Godwin, DK Metcalf, Stephon Diggs, Andre Johnson, Jeremy Maclin, and then a middle-of-the-road guy like George Pickens. Now, Chris Olave will be our next player, and with Olave, I wish he was on a team other than New Orleans Saints, because you go back and you look at really all 3 years of his NFL career, the dude's been averaging about 2.25 yards per route. I mean, for a wide receiver through the first 3 years of their career, that's great. Through the first 2 years of his career, is that 25% of his team's targets. The difficulty is you're arguably going to have the worst quarterback play in the NFL on a team that's not going to be playing for anything, and you have concussion concerns. So I would love to rank him higher than this. Frankly, it's just going to be difficult. Going over to Jerry Jeudy, I think Jerry Jeudy kind of won the NFL draft. Expectations were going to be that Travis Hunter was going to the Cleveland Browns, going to play wide receiver. Travis Hunter obviously goes to Jacksonville, so Jerry Jeudy dodges that bullet. And also, they don't really take a quarterback of significance. So it looks like Joe Flacco is going to be the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, which is probably bad for Browns fans, but it's great for fantasy purposes. And we go back to this past season, Jeudy was at the wide receiver 12 mark. Jeudy played 94% of the snaps for the Cleveland Browns in 2024. Jerry Jeudy had over 1,200 receiving yards. The efficiency wasn't great, but I mean, the Browns are horrible. We're going to expect them to be horrible. The efficiency is still going to be bad, but the man ran 700 routes. I think that's actually one more route than what we had from Jamar Chase. Now going over to Calvin Ridley, maybe Calvin Ridley can get saved by Cam Ward. I don't know. Calvin Ridley in Tennessee did see about 24% of his team's targets. He played 17 games, still finished as a wide receiver 3. He's going to be 31 years old, which I know it's very difficult to expect a player to get better at this age. Like if you look at the historical data, it just doesn't support it. But I think this is one of those very unique situations where you do just have a dramatic quarterback upgrade in the form of Cam Ward. So I don't think it would be too surprising. Going over and looking at Rome Odunze. So a couple different things here. One, I would be in on Rome improving with Ben Johnson. I think you would be getting a lot better from year 1 to year 2. But we need to be on the same page with exactly how bad this dude was as a rookie. He wasn't just bad. He was horrific. He played 85% of the snaps. So don't think Rome's season where he finishes the wide receiver 47 in total fantasy points, despite playing all 17 games, was bad because he didn't get the opportunities. No, the man ran 552 routes as a rookie. He got every opportunity you could ask for. He just did nothing with them. 1.32 yards per route. Horrendous. And again, I would say, okay, maybe he gets better with the new coaching staff and Caleb Williams going into year 2 and Rome going into year 2 as well. But my hesitation going all in on that is the coaching staff that came into Chicago looked at the roster and went, yeah, we need to get Caleb some weapons. I know we have DJ Moore. I know we have Rome Odunze, but let's spend our first 2 picks in the NFL draft on pass catchers. Let's clog this up. And it makes me think that maybe Ben Johnson isn't a big believer in Rome. And of course, that has to be concerning with the lack of efficiency that we saw in year 1. Now, going over to our next guy, we are going to look at Jacoby Myers. Myers is always a value in these drafts, right? I mean, if you're looking at just the amount of points that he is able to put in and week out, he's finished over the past 4 seasons as wide receiver 24, 26, 20, and then 19. The efficiency is not great, but that's because the offense isn't great. So if you think that Geno's going to be able to come in and elevate this Raiders offense, I think you should be more excited about Myers. I'm looking at Khalil Shakir. Y'all know, not a super big Shakir guy, but the Bills don't bring anybody in when it comes to the wide receiver position. You still have Josh Allen. You'll see Shakir will definitely go a lot higher than this in underdog drafts just because the Josh Allen team kind of has to take him. Matthew Golden will be our next guy. You have like 7 wide receiver 2s for the Green Bay Packers. But with that being said, Matthew Golden's the only guy with round 1 NFL draft capital. I really hate the prospect profile. If you go over to the prospects page on flockfantasy.com, you'll just see that his production numbers at Houston, his production numbers at Texas were horrendous. But I know the film guys really liked what they saw with his ability to get open, particularly at the end of the season after the Isaiah Bond injury. I'm going down to our next tier. Let's rapid fire these guys. Stephon Diggs, 32-year-old wide receiver coming off a significant injury, but in a pretty damn good situation, and he looked okay at the beginning of the season at Houston. George Pickens, we probably need to move down here. I probably need to put the Niners guys ahead of him, but maybe with Pickens, he ends up getting traded to a better situation. With the Niners players, if you were looking at these rankings, you will absolutely never draft them on Underdog. Again, Jennings and Pearsall are going ahead of Brandon Aiyuk. And with Jennings, here's my hesitation. He's 28 years old. Okay, let's put that into context. 28-year-old wide receiver breakout or 27-year-old wide receiver breakout. How often does this happen? Throughout all of history that I've been playing fantasy football, a wide receiver to break out this late in their NFL careers and then not be a one-hit wonder, but actually maintain this type of production, only guy is Adam Thielen. That's the only guy I can think of. And if we're looking at Jauan Jennings early in his career in San Francisco, did he just never see the field and that's why he was so bad, but when he got on the field, he produced? Or was he always bad? 1.6, 1.51, and then 1.2 yards per route run through his first 3 seasons. So Jennings was horrifically bad through his first 3 years of his NFL career. At 27, he pops off and has a great season, finishes as the wide receiver 24. But from what I've seen historically, I think that this is more likely to regress than it is to continue to improve. Ricky Pearsall, we drafted a bunch of them. He actually was a pretty damn efficient rookie. Like if I'm going to have to move somebody up these rankings, it's going to be Pearsall. Deebo Samuel, again, this is another player that if you were looking at his ADP on Underdog, you would absolutely never take him if you're drafting off these ranks. My thing is, he looked washed last year. He looked overweight. The Niners just essentially got anything they could to get his contract off the books. I think Terry McLaurin dominates the target volume. And I think with Daniels, I'm not expecting this to be a top 5 offense with passing yardage and passing touchdowns because Daniels can run the ball himself. Going over and looking at Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed, I know, had some spike weeks at the beginning of the year, but don't get it twisted. Jayden Reed got worse going from year 1 to year 2. Jayden Reed fell from wide receiver 21 to wide receiver 29. Jayden Reed fell from 94 targets down to 75. This is despite playing a higher percentage of snaps. And now you have the Packers going out there and taking a bunch of receivers in the draft, including somebody in round 1. And then going over and looking at Cooper Kupp, the concern that you have is he's completely washed, going to be 32 years old. And if we're looking at what we've seen over the past 3 years, you have seen him fall from over the past 4 years, the wide receiver 1 to the wide receiver 20 to the wide receiver 36 to the wide receiver 37. And now you have much worse quarterback play than what you had in Los Angeles. So very concerning. But again, I am drafting every single night on Underdog. I need to be working my butt off. These rankings are going to change a ton through the course of the season. So please let me know what you disagree with. Let me know what I need to reevaluate because I'm sure I got a bunch wrong here. But again, I really appreciate you. Really hope that you draft with us in the live streams that we're doing every single night. And again, if you wanted to get on Underdog so you could draft with us, you can find that link in the description, in the comment section. Use promo code FLOCK. You'll get that 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you'll be getting our 2025 Fantasy Football Draft Guide cheat sheet, Underdog's Best Ball. So you are not going to have to spend any time at all with the team during the season. So it's just going to be some extra fun on the side and not replace your main fantasy team. But I think that's all I got for you. I really appreciate you and really hope I get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.